President Biden says the U.S. is prepared to respond to a potential Russian invasion of Ukraine.
The president addressed the American people today, soon after a series of cyber attacks on websites for the Ukrainian army and major banks. Here's some of what he had to say.
If Russia attacks the United States or our allies through asymmetric means, like disruptive cyber attacks against our companies or critical infrastructure, we are prepared to respond. But we're moving in lockstep with our NATO allies and partners to deepen our collective defense against threats in cyberspace. Two paths are still open. For the sake of historic responsibility, Russia and the United States share for global stability, for the sake of our common future, to choose diplomacy. But let there be no doubt. If Russia commits this breach by invading Ukraine, responsible nations around the world will not hesitate to respond. We do not stand for freedom where it is at risk today, will surely pay a steeper price tomorrow.
The Kremlin says it is pulling back its troops and wants to continue diplomatic negotiations. But that conflicts with U.S. officials reporting that Russian forces have moved rocket launchers and long-range artillery into possible firing positions. The West still has not agreed to fulfill Russia's main demand to keep Ukraine out of NATO. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin is following this situation. David, so Russia says it is sending troops back to their bases, even releasing videos in an attempt to back up that claim. But is there any evidence to corroborate that?
Well, U.S. intelligence, with all its satellites and communications intercepts, has not been able to find any evidence that troops that matter are going back to their bases. And that means troops that have been moved up to the what we could call the Ukraine front are somehow pulling back from the front and going back to their bases. If there are troops going back to their bases, they are troops that are irrelevant to any plans to invade Ukraine. And we've seen the videos, but I don't know that we've seen any verification that those videos are current. A tank on a railroad car is a tank on a railroad car, and you don't necessarily know when it was taken. But the bottom line is that the U.S. has not seen any change for the better in the disposition of Russian troops around Ukraine. And in fact, the president, when he spoke today, used a higher number than American officials have ever used before. He now puts the number of Russian troops arrayed around Ukraine at 150,000. Up until now, it had been 130,000. So it just doesn't look like anybody that matters is going home.
David, Russian officials didn't show up to an emergency meeting in Europe today where they were supposed to explain their military buildup along the Ukrainian border. What are you hearing about Russia's preparation at the border? How has it shifted over the past few days?
Well, of course, we have these exercises going on both in Belarus, which is on the northern border of Ukraine, and in the Black Sea, which is the southern coast of Ukraine. But what is most alarming is that Russian units are starting to move out of their assembly areas. Those are the commercial satellite photos we've been looking at for the past several weeks, in which all the vehicles are lined up in perfect order, bumper to bumper. They have started moving out of those assembly areas up into attack positions closer, much closer to the border. They have dispersed out into the field, and when they get out in the field, they put up camouflage netting so that they are not so easily seen from space. So regardless of what the Russians say they are doing, what the U.S. sees them doing is continuing with preparations for an invasion of Ukraine.
Well, David, what about the cyber attack today? We've been hearing for a long time that one of the ways a Russian invasion could start is with cyber attacks designed to hamstring Ukrainian communications. So is this the cyber attack that we've been watching for?
Well, this is what's called a denial of service cyber attack, in which you just flood a website with so many hits that it crashes. And they've done that to some Ministry of Defense websites and some state-owned bank websites in Ukraine. But the Russians are capable of much, much more than that. They basically have the capability to shut down all digital communications in, say, the capital of Kyiv. So on the scale of what the Russians are capable of, these rank sort of as nuisance attacks. And I think if they are precursors to an invasion, they are the early precursors designed to sow confusion and maybe even panic. Because, of course, when you start taking down the websites of banks, people start to worry about their savings. But the attacks that people expect ahead of a Russian invasion would be much more severe and might well include airstrikes as well as cyber attacks.
The tensions just seem to get higher every day. David Martin, thank you so much.